Well, hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of It's Steven Time. I'm your host, Steven Alexander. In today's episode, I have Aziza Kibibi here to discuss her awesome story. It's not really awesome when you first hear about it, but it's so impactful and it's so insightful to the many things that people are going through during quarantine. You guys stay tuned. Why? Because you're watching IST.
There's a Steven show, the Steven show, the Steven show, yeah.
Hello, how are you, Aziza?
I'm great. How are you, Steven?
Good. I cannot complain. I just want to thank you first for your time and just for being willing to share your story. I know there's so many different things during quarantine. And I just want to first commend you for just being willing to talk about your story. First and foremost, let me introduce you. You are an author and a publisher, but most importantly, you were on the episode of Evil Lives Here, and you shared your story about as a kid, just growing up with your father and how you were sexually abused, molested by your father. And during this time of quarantine, I think about, people talk about losing money and, everything's happened, people losing their jobs. And, we've had race issues. We had so many issues, and we sometimes fail to acknowledge the things that are going on within the homes of people. And, many kids I think about who went to school and could escape, their abusers are now at home stuck with them. So I just want you to share your story. Like, at what age did this happen for you? When did you encounter this?
Well, my father started molesting me when I was 8 years old. And he started raping me at 10 years old. So I guess you can say I was just entering puberty. I didn't get my period until I was about 12. But I can't even say that I started developing early, because I know a lot of people think that, well, there are girls who start developing early and they're fast and they look like women, and men are attracted to them because of that. But that's not the case. I was flat chested, I was skinny, I was frail. My father was attracted to children, and he expressed that, through his abuse of me. Over the years, I first got pregnant for him when I was 15. And over the years, I've had 4 children for him. I was homeschooled. So even when you mentioned about being home with quarantine, part of his control mechanism was to not allow me to have contact. Let me say to prevent me from having contact with not that many people. So at some point he prevented me from interacting with, all of my siblings from interacting with our grandparents and our aunts. And it was really about just keeping his doctrine, his belief system, and what he wanted to do on us, and using force and physical abuse and fear to control what was going on in the household.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, you during that time encountering that, how did it make you feel when you were encountering those things? Because as a child, sounds like you were sheltered, right? Being sheltered, it's like you don't have anyone else you can talk to about, is this normal? Do other children go through these kind of things? So how did you navigate through that?
I guess you can say faith. It's funny because the antithesis of my father's behaviors was that he was a very spiritual person. He believed in God. He studied a lot of different religions. So he instilled those things in his children as well. So I grew up with an idea that there is a higher power that, controls our destiny or rewards us when we are good and punishes us when we are bad. And unfortunately, he did use that. There is a such thing as spiritual abuse. He did use that to control as well. But at the same time, I think just the love that I had for my other siblings, for my other siblings, I kind of just took on the responsibility of satiating his desires. And I mean, at the same time, he also gave me the responsibility. By the time I was entering my preteens, it was my responsibility to sexually satisfy him. So I think just having this kind of this belief and this hope, and I think that it was probably very childlike, that I would one day escape, or maybe that he would even stop abusing me. And that's what kept me going. That, and just focusing on protecting my brothers and sisters, trying to enjoy the moments that we did have where he wasn't beating us or he wasn't punishing us in some way. And I think that's what it is with children. You know, children tend to find ways to cope, even if it's multiple personality disorder. But they do find a way. You're at a point where you're developing as a human and you're open to a lot of things. And I think that is what I ended up doing. I started focusing on my siblings. I started focusing on my other interest, which was cooking. And then I just tried to make the best of the days in preparation for what was going to happen during the nights.
You know, I want to ask you two things. The first thing, you said during the nights, and it just stood out to me. So what what happened during those? Can you be descriptive about that?
Well, my father, I mean, and it's funny because the first time he molested me, it was actually during the day, you know, and my mother was in the house at the time. He pulled me aside and he told me that it was time for him to teach me how to become a woman. So that was the first time. But then after that, he would come into my bedroom at night and he would get me up. Sometimes I would try and act like I was still asleep, but he would fondle me and he would molest me even through that. And then as I got older, when he started penetrating me or trying to penetrate me, you know, he just became more and more aggressive. So he would know that I wasn't asleep, and I tried fake sleep a lot. And then it got to the point where he was lifting me out of my bed and bringing me into the family living room and then closing and locking the door. So it just progressed and got worse and worse until I got pregnant, I guess you can say. So yeah, so yes, it started off in the nights when I was little. My mom was asleep. If he had a girlfriend over, she was asleep because he was polygamous, and my brothers and sisters were asleep. Well, that I knew of. I later learned that my brother was actually awake some of the times, and he got to a point where he would try to climb in the bed with me to protect me. You know, God rest his soul, he committed accidental suicide a couple of years ago. And it was just before, like, he was really trying to, I think, come to terms and process some of the memories that he had witnessing me being abused. But then when it became a way of life and my mother knew and was not challenging my father anymore, then it wasn't just at night. It was literally just times during the day. He'd bring me into my parents' bedrooms, close and lock the door, keep me in there raping me. And then it just became, you know, a daily thing to do.
You know, I want to ask you about your mother because I knew that your parents worked together, and I wanted to ask you, growing up and you encountered that, how did it make you, do you have resentment towards your mother? Because I can't imagine you as a woman and being in a house with another woman to not feel like you're taken up for and not, you know, just feel so suppressed. And like your mother, did you feel like your mother didn't care? Like, how did you feel?
Yeah, I had taken on, I think mentally, Cinderella is my favorite fairy tale. And because I had so much responsibility in the house, as a child, I started to feel like I was Cinderella and my mother was an evil stepmother and my father was like some demon from somewhere. I think that was just the way that I processed it. So no, I didn't have any allies. These were my two parents who were in charge of me. They provided for me. They took care of me as far as food and shelter. And there wasn't any other influential adult in my life. I do think as a mom of girls, that's just part of the part of the development of the relationship between a mother and a daughter can get strained at times, especially when the daughter starts, becoming a woman and trying to find her own identity. But that with my mother was different because yes, I did have resentment as a child because she wasn't doing anything. I was being hurt by my father and she wasn't doing anything to protect me. And then in other ways, she was blaming me. She would tell me that, she could not compete with me because I was a child. So then there was this weird kind of jealousy and competition coming from her. Even her as my mother, raising me as her daughter, her disciplinary techniques was harsh. She would punish me for things that I just didn't think were fair. And a lot of it was stemming because in her mind, I took her husband, which she actually did verbalize when I was a teenager. So it was just challenging. I didn't, like, at one point I went through a time where I felt that I deserved everything that was happening to me because it was happening to me. And I think a lot of victims and survivors do go through that point of self-blame. And I went through that as well.
So literally if you think about it, you were in a household with your siblings and with your parents, but you were already isolated because he sheltered you guys. But it was almost
Right.
like you were double isolated because you didn't have that support from your mom. You were also trying to protect your siblings. So it was like you were a lady on an island by yourself.
Right, exactly. I was extremely alone. And, I learned what depression was from a very young age. My only escape was to sleep, which I didn't get enough of. But the only thing I really could look forward to in my life on a daily basis was dreaming, being able to have lucid dreams or control them in some way to make what my life that I was experiencing in real life, better in the dream world. So.
Yeah. I want to ask you too, so you also had siblings who were females as well.
Mm-hmm.
Did your father molest any of them?
Yes, my father, including my own children, we've counted 21 children. My mother and father had 9 together. And out of the 9, there were 7 girls, and he molested 4 of us by my mother.
So
actually, no, I'm sorry. There are 6 girls by my mother, but there is another daughter by a different mom who he molested as well. So in total, he molested 5 girls.
Wow. So when did you find all this out? Because I know you were, trying to be the protector as being the oldest sibling, right? Because you were the oldest, correct?
Yes, I'm the oldest.
When did you find out that, whoa, like, I'm trying to be the protector, but he's still, when you talked about earlier that it was your role, and then you find out that the role that you are in, he is doing this to other people. So it's almost like he manipulated you to feel like you were the only one. And then when you find out, so what was that like to experience that once you found that out?
It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking because my father had me doing some very sick things in exchange for him not to touch my sisters. So when I discovered it, I walked in on him molesting one of my sisters. And it was just heartbreaking, and I felt extremely defeated. And it's funny, I think that people who are abused, they do continue to search for any kind of agency over their life that they can. And in a way, I felt like I had some control in, you know, doing these things or not fighting against my father while he was abusing me, because the result was that he wouldn't abuse my sisters. So, I'm sorry, I'm starting to get emotional. I don't usually get emotional during interviews, but so when I found out that he was molesting, or he had started molesting my sister, I felt extremely defeated. And I guess that was definitely a moment that I felt like giving up, essentially. Like there was nothing, absolutely nothing I could do. I not only could I not protect myself or save myself, I then could not protect or save my sisters, who I thought that I was. I thought that I was making this sacrifice to help them, and it turned out that I really had no control whatsoever.
But when you felt defeated, how did you navigate through that? How did you just sit back and just observe everything and say, what is going on? How did you just navigate through that, being defeated?
Wow, I guess that's something that I probably really have to think about. How did I navigate it? Some of it was acceptance. I did go through a time where I just accepted this was our lives. I mean, my father, not even just for me as his child or for any of his children or even his wife, my father was very convincing. He was charismatic. A lot of people found him, especially women, very attractive. He had men and women following and listening to his doctrine, even though it didn't include pedophilia, but just other things, his perspective on God and the government and the world in general, and his place in the world and Black people's place in the world. And I think that even, you know, we talk about now with Black Lives Matter and us as a community, you know, really establishing ourselves in America as people who should be respected, considered, you know, we should matter. And not only that, we should be valued. He was into the Black Panthers, and, you know, he taught us about African American history and slavery and our ancestors in Africa and everything else. So all of that, he was just a very convincing person. So yeah, I was brainwashed. I got to the point, especially by the time I was 13, 14, teenager, I was brainwashed. I had accepted what my role was according to him in our family, in the world, and that was to have his children and create this new blue blood race. And I accepted it. And then it didn't help much that he was then winning in life. You know, he was excelling in his career. He was excelling as a music video director. So all of those things kind of validated and solidified some of the things that he said. So I guess in that acceptance, I think we as humans, we are extremely powerful, and a lot of us are still learning how to harness and use that power. And we can adapt, you know, and I've been there. I have adapted some very disgusting situations. Like I look back now and I think that's why I just love my life and love myself so much now, because it's like, shit, look at where I was coming from and the things that I have experienced, and I'm appreciative of not having to be there anymore. So there is you can take solace in just accepting your circumstances. A lot of times when you have people who are struggling and they're going through depression, and I know sometimes that's hormonal, but often it's because you're fighting against, you can choose to be happy is what I'm trying to say. You can choose to be happy wherever you are. You can be homeless on the street and you could just choose to accept it and be happy. Does that mean your circumstances should be accepted? No, but you can actually mentally choose to accept it. And I think that during that time, that's what I did. Well, I mean, I know that that's what I did. And then it just made the struggle not so hard. It made the suffering not so bad. And honestly, there were times that my father was, I mean, he was still raping me in the context of I did not want to have sex with him. Was he holding me down and like forcing himself on me and beating me every time he had sex with me? No, that wasn't always the case. It did happen, but it got to a point where there was a period that he wasn't so physically abusive because everybody was complying with what he instructed them to do. And then, but that didn't always last very long. You know, I lost a pregnancy because of one of his outbursts when he was fired from directing the Fugees Killing Me Softly video, because he was hired, then he was fired, then he was rehired. When he was fired from that, he took it out on me. He took it out on my mother. When Wyclef Jean did not invite him, or the MTV Awards did not invite him to accept the award that he won, he then sodomized me and raped me and beat me, and I lost the pregnancy. So, you know, it was in and out and up and down, and you really just didn't know what would trigger him. So just like, I hope I answered your question. I feel like I kind of went off.
No, you are fine. My talk show is about people being real, honest, and open and transparent. And I want to say to you, you got me in tears. Because you know, people are going through this in real life, and just to see,
and worse.
But to see how strong you are, I know so many people who use the excuses. They use excuses for why they behave the way they do because of the encounters they have had. I don't even know you. You don't know. You don't know me. We're both strangers, but I can just tell that you have this positive spirit that just uplifts so many other people. And, you know, I just want to commend you for that, for being strong through that, because it takes a warrior to fight through that and to battle through it and say, you know what, one day I'm going to be on top, and one day I don't have to deal with this anymore. I want to ask you now, like, you have your children by your father. How, I can only imagine having kids by my parents, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
How does, when you had your kids, when you birthed your kids during the pregnancy, the delivery, how did that make you feel? Did you have any resentment towards your father when you looked at your kids? Or did you, or, you know, when you see your kids now, do you see him, or do you, you know, because sometimes I know lots of people have that and encounter that with, you know, by their abusers, they have their child and they just despise their kids.
Right. And that's why, honestly, there are a lot more people born from incestuous abuse than we think they are, especially like in the South. I mean, I have learned so much about just different areas, cultures, and communities where, you know, grandma was raising her daughter's daughter by Uncle Bert. You see what I'm saying? Like, there's all of that kind of stuff that goes on. But no, to answer your question simply, no, I don't. When I look at my children, and when my first daughter was born, I had her on a construction site. My father delivered her, and I looked into her eyes, and she was mine. You know, she was a gift from God, even though the circumstances that brought her to me was horrible. But no, I don't see them at all. I see me. I see love. I see my creator. I see nature. I mean, I see the world in them. And to me, and I think that every parent, every person that has a child and takes a child into this world, not just brings a child into the world, but even through adoption or surrogacy, is an opportunity for them to mold a person that could be a gift to the world. And that's what I see them as. You know, they come from me. They have me in them. They're a lot like me. They look just like me. They're like carbon copies. So no. And it's funny because my son, he's 20 now. Well, he'll be 21 in a couple of months. And we have, you know, as a Black man, he's like, of course, single mom. He's gonna be warring and there'll be conflict. And one time he must have thought that I said that, you know, he's acting just like our father. And I'm like, no. you know, you are your own spirit. You are your own spiritual being having your own human experience. No, I don't look at you as that other person. So I know I don't have that at all. And I mean, I understand those that do look at their children who was born from rape or from incestuous abuse, them that being a reminder. You see what I'm saying? You don't have a choice in the situation, and I sympathize with them. But for me, I just see love. I look at them and I just see love. I call them my lotus flowers. They came from shit, they came from mud, but they are like the most beautiful things in the world to me.
Yeah. You know, I want to ask you, at what point did you say, you know what, enough is enough? Because I know that you eventually stood up to your father. At one point did you say, you know what, I'm not dealing with this. My siblings are not going to deal with this, and you're going to stop. And how did you get that courage to do so?
It was a combination of some things. My children were taken away from me. It started with a very lengthy process of my son woke up one morning with seizures. I'm just gonna run through it real quick because it's a long story. But and my brother, who I spoke of earlier, took me and my son to the hospital. My father was out of town at the time, and he just wait a minute, hold on one second. I'm sorry, something distracted me on my computer. He took us to the hospital. What?
See, that's
okay. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Sorry. He took us to the hospital, and of course that raised questions because I'd never been to the hospital before. I filled out who my kid's father was. I put my father's name down as their father, and that raised questions. Through the process, social services came in. Unfortunately, I had a very racist caseworker, and she came and threatened me from the beginning. And then having my father in my ear, threatening to kill me and kill my sisters at home. It was just a whole mess. And eventually social services took my children. Now, this was a blessing in disguise. I knew it at the time because at least they were taken away from him. I lost them, yes, I was heartbroken because of that, but they weren't in the environment with my father anymore, and I was grateful for that. At the same time, I've heard horror stories about the foster care system. But anyway, during my process of getting them back, I educated myself. I started reading books on law, on family law specifically. Now, having access to people outside of my family, and because of course my father was afraid, he was a fugitive, he was on the run because they wanted him for questioning. He was not as involved or wasn't in my ear as much because then I had to conform to what the authorities wanted me to do. And through that, I just learned more about the system. My kids didn't have birth certificates. I had to learn how to get them birth certificates and social security numbers, and just educating myself and learning more about how the world worked empowered me on a spiritual level. I learned a lot of things that what my father was saying was not true, that he was lying. And I think just overall, just having access to tools and then putting a plan in my mind where it's like, okay, I feel more confident in myself now because I have answers that I was learning, that I'm learning now from other sources. Not every answer is coming from my father. And then eventually one day when he was about to take my little sister into the room to do what he does, I stopped him. And I think because I had never, well, it had been a long time. I used to try to stand up to him when I was younger, but it had been a long time since I challenged him or stood up to him, and he was in shock. And then after that, other things happened with my mom, and someone helped her get a restraining order. And then that's when the entire process started of like reporting him and the police catching him and us ending up in court. So it's a long story. It's a long story spanning over a few years. But as far as just my confidence in myself, I definitely credit that to just educating myself on how the system works and not only having his doctrine being put into my head.
Right. You know, I want to ask you now, I kind of want to shift things. I want to ask you now, do you have any resentment towards your mother and your father because of the things you went through? And also, what does your relationship look like with them now? I know your father's in jail, correct?
Right, he's in jail, yes.
You went to visit him or see him or...
No, I haven't been to visit him. I've not communicated with him. Interestingly enough, I did get a message on my YouTube channel from someone who apparently was his cellmate who tried to reach out to me, but that's about it. I've not communicated with him at all. As far as having resentment, no, I don't. I'm disappointed. I'm extremely disappointed because he had a lot of potential. You know, even with as evil as he was a brilliant man. He was a brilliant Black man that could have contributed so much to our society. But, you know, he had this deviance that I can't even say he struggled with because he fully embraced it. And I have forgiven him as in a way to take my power back. He took my power away from me from a very young age. And I have decided that I'm not going to allow what he did control the decisions that I make going forward in the future and who I am. As far as my mother, it actually took me longer to forgive her. You know, my father, in my eyes, he just succumbed to his most primal sick self that I think that a lot of people probably struggle with. It's funny because the most horrible thing is literally just a decision. You can think all kinds of stuff, you can imagine all kinds of things, but then to actually put it into action is just a decision. And my father decided to go along with what he felt like would satisfy him. With my mother, I felt that she did have a responsibility in protecting us. And knowing her and growing up with her and being her daughter, I saw plenty of opportunities that she could have taken control, you know, in my opinion. And she just never did. So it did take me longer to forgive her. And then even in the process of escaping, she was not particularly instrumental. She kind of took the back seat. But I get it. Her and my father has been together from when they were teenagers. She's the only man that he knows. So, you know, I think that he still had some mental chains on her for a while. Nowadays, our relationship was very good. And that is because I intentionally made sure that I created a relationship with her. I had daughters. I wanted a relationship with my mother that did not include my father's dictatorship. And we were best of friends. But then other things in our lives happened. I started recognizing that she still had some animosity and resentment towards my children. Some things would just slip out in conversation. So I just decided, you know what, and it was hurting my kids. It was hurting my kids. There were times that I really needed help because my father stole my identity. He opened credit cards in my name. I mean, the financial abuse, religious abuse, like everything you could name, he did. And she did not, even after years after escaping him, I just felt she wasn't really taking responsibility. So I have decided to love her from afar. I wish her the best. I love her dearly. She is my mother. But, you know, she has to atone for what she did and what she didn't do to protect her daughters. And the fact that she was continuing to hurt my children on an emotional level, I was just like, you know, we just have to stay away. We just have to stay away. So as far as resentment, no, I don't have resentment for her. I don't have resentment towards her.
You know, that again shows just how big you are and how God's grace is just so abundant in you and over your life. You know, I want to ask you now, because so many people go through this and so many people of color, Black families go through this. Mm-hmm. What advice could you give to Black families and just families in general, you know, mm-hmm. things about color sometimes that really we all go through. What advice could you give to those people about telling their story?
about telling their story. Okay, so there are many ways you can tell your story. One, there's so many people who told their story to me for the first time. Like, I'm literally the first person that they told, and I don't even know them, whether it be through email or messages or whatever. I would say that don't rush yourself. And I guess I have to be more specific. Let me give some context. We have people who need to tell their stories because they are still in the situation, right? And that there are other people in the situation being affected. One of the deciding factors of reporting our father was the fact that he was continuing to have children with other women. And we knew that he would just eventually start molesting them. So that drove us to be like, you know what, we need to report him. He needs to just be off the streets and not be around children. So I think that for people who are in a situation or are in a family where they are protecting an abuser, because essentially that's what it is, where they're deciding that, well, that's none of my business, they need to just, buck up and take some responsibility. I think that we have a social responsibility. All people, all adults have a social responsibility to protect children. And if you see something, then you should say something. If you suspect something, then you should start having the conversation. So in that way of telling your story, there should not be any hesitation, because there are other people's lives in jeopardy. Just like now, George Floyd was killed and people told the story with their cell phones, and we're marching on the streets and we're telling these stories because people are enraged. I think people need to be just as enraged about child molestation and domestic violence, because women are children, and children are our future, and women are our foundation. Essentially, people are birthed through women. And if we're going to continue to produce productive members of society, then their mothers have to be taken care of, in my opinion. As far as a survivor telling their story, or even while they're still a victim, that could take some time. That's why I am very focused on providing as much information as possible. I think when we have access to information, it empowers us. So that's why, you see me on television. I've written my book. I'm very active on social media, because that's a decision that a person has to make. It takes an abused woman at least 7 times to effectively leave her abuser. And the same for men. Same-sex marriages, same-sex relationships are riddled with abuse. And then there is women who abuse men. You see, like, there's so many things. And essentially it's about the person that is being abused accessing resources, feeling empowered, because their power has been taken away from them. They feel helpless often. They feel like they're at the mercy of this person who they love, essentially. They love this person and they really just want the abuse to stop. So I think, what you're doing as far as sharing my story and other survivors sharing their stories, that really helps those who are not ready to get out of their situation. It just really empowers them. And then for survivors, I feel like this is a very long answer. And then for survivors who would like to help by doing some of the things that I do, I have resources. In fact, I'm publishing my podcast. I just published a teaser for my podcast called Self-Publish. It's available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and all anywhere you can get podcasts. But it's really about us as humans sharing ourselves with the world for the betterment of our world, of our society, of humanity, and different ways you can do that. It may not always be, getting up on TV and speaking out, but it could be just sharing your story in a classroom. Before I was on public platforms, I was sharing my story during career days in a classroom. But I understand that it is sensitive. This is a very personal part of you. When something bad happens to you, it's a very personal part of you. And it may just take some time, some meditation, some more reading. But I think that the more information you take in about it, then the stronger you just become. And then you could turn whatever tragedies that you may have suffered into triumphs by helping other people with the stories.
That is so true. You know,
Yeah.
I want to, before we go, because we're going to wrap up, we have a couple minutes left. But I just want to talk about what you do now. Now you're
Okay.
a chef, correct? You've been cooking for over 20 years.
Yes, for a long time.
For a long time, yes. So tell us, you know, where can people find you? Where can they follow you on your social media? Where can they keep up with you?
Well, Aziza Kibibi, I was blessed with a very unique name. So Aziza Kibibi across the board, AzizaKibibi.com. As you know, that is, well, how did you find me? Let me just ask that question.
You know, I am a broadcast journalist, so I have experience in news and production and all that. So I know.
Okay, so we're siblings in that, because that's what I majored in.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah.
we know how to do our research. So
exactly.
Well,
yeah.
I just thank you so much again for just sharing your time here and impacting so many people. Continue to be that positive ray of sunshine in so many people's lives, and continue to share your story, because one by one you are inspiring people to help them tell their story. And if you want to, again, just mention the social media platforms.
Yes, Aziza Kibibi, AZIZA and that's my Twitter, my Instagram, my Facebook, my website, my Pinterest. I mean, any social media is Aziza Kibibi. And then my organization, Precious Little Ladies Incorporated. Our mission is to strengthen the bonds between mothers and daughters to combat child molestation, domestic violence, incestuous abuse, and sexual assault. And we really use media. So all of the appearances that I make are through the organization. We really use media. We use narrative therapy. We do have an online Facebook group. I used to conduct in-person survivor support groups, but because of COVID-19, we had to shift gears. So right now we have a group on Facebook. And then our social media for the organization is PLL Nonprofit. And you can find resources on there, more inspirational information, details. And as a journalist, it's definitely a great resource for information. I use a lot of journal articles to support, the posts that we post. And then my book is available on Amazon and in many other bookstores and stuff. I just can't really list them right now, but I say go to Amazon. You get a digital copy from there. I will be doing a giveaway soon. So for any of your viewers, please, follow me. So then you be tuned in on the announcement for free book giveaways. I think that's everything. If you Google me, everything will come up. And then my YouTube page, I have so many videos with my kids, of our life, instructional videos on dealing with surviving and preventing abuse, interviews. I have some very affluent friends, so I tend to interview them often. And Aziza, I am Aziza Kibibi is the YouTube, and you'll find pretty much everything on there.
Yes. Well, again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. And to my viewers, I want to thank you guys for your time. And I hope that Aziza's story somehow, in some way, impacts you. And if you know someone that's going through sexual abuse, stand up for them. Helping them to speak out and tell their story.
Yes.
Well, you guys, I love all of you guys, and I want you guys to stay safe. And I'll see you guys with the next episode. Much love to you. Remember, in everything that we do, always remember to let's go